welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the best books I read in 2022. Now, some of you may be wondering, I recently just posted a best books of all time. Well, this is going to be a bit different because I'm just going to be discussing the books that I read in 2022. So the first book I'm going to be talking about is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It may come as no surprise to you, I really loved The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Surprisingly, I didn't really like Daisy Jones and the Six, so I kind of figured when I started reading this book it'd be a bit hit or miss. When I read the synopsis though, I decided to give it a shot. So this book follows the children of Mick Riva, one of the characters from The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and it's dual timeline discussing the relationship between Mick and the mother of his children. The other timeline discusses where the children are now. It's setting up for when they're about to have a house party. I really enjoyed this book because of the discussions about like family trauma, generational trauma, the relationship between the kids and each other, the kids and their father, the kids and their mother. I wouldn't really call it a romance because it really doesn't glorify the relationships between two people in a very toxic relationship. It discusses that and how it can affect the children. It also talks about, I guess, parental responsibility. I really loved all of those like relationship discussions, and that's really what this book is. I feel like for most people, if they didn't really like this, if they thought it was boring, it was because this story didn't really have like an interesting plot. It wasn't really about the plot. It basically felt like another like biopic, or I guess like a biography of this family. Things that happened in your childhood can really affect you in your present. One of the best things I loved was the way that these kids had to rely on each other. The descriptions about Malibu, I mean, that was just a plus. I love the setting. I thought it was really nice. It also helped that I really loved one of the points of views in here. Mick Riva's oldest daughter. I really loved Nina's point of view, what she had to do as an eldest sibling and how it didn't really represent her, but she did what she had to do and all the pressure that it put on her to be the eldest. So yes, definitely a really great book, and I highly recommend this one. So the next book I'm going to be talking about is Things We Do in the Dark. So for this book, I really thought it was going to be like a usual thriller where it was all about the plot and what happens and the twists at the end. That's actually not why I like this book. It did have a few twists, nothing that you wouldn't really see coming, especially if you're like a veteran thriller reader. But what I really enjoyed about this thriller and what stood out to me is the character development. Wait, I should probably talk about what this book is about first. This is about a woman who was arrested in her bathroom, covered in the blood of her husband. She isn't worried about being charged with the murder of her husband. She's more worried about someone discovering the mysteries in her past. Now, like I was saying earlier, I felt like I love this book because of the character development. Like the main character, I didn't know what to think about her in the beginning. She kind of felt pretty bland, like kind of like plastic, like very fake. Like I had no idea if the fronts that she was putting on was real or not. I really enjoyed like the discussions about how these characters grew and what led to them making all these decisions in their life. And even the reporter, I felt like his story was compelling, not as compelling as the main character. I really did enjoy this book, and I didn't enjoy it for the thriller aspect. Like I said, I enjoyed it for, I guess it felt more contemporary, like a study on the characters and why they are the way they are. And I felt all the emotions during this one. I felt sad for these characters, happy, disappointed, angry. Like it gave me the full range of emotions. So I definitely highly recommend this one. The next book I'm going to be talking about is Finding Me by Viola Davis. For those of you that don't know, Viola Davis is a successful actress. I guess if you've watched How to Get Away with Murder, The Help, those are the main ones that I think she's known for. And this is her memoir. Discussing her childhood, growing up, I guess leading into her career in acting. Now for this one, oh my gosh, it was tough to read this one. I listened to it on audiobook and it was read by Viola Davis, and her voice is she has a great voice, especially when she's reading her own words. And hearing her, I basically talk about all the traumatic things that she went through as a child was definitely really heartbreaking. Despite all the sad things that happened, there are traces of hope and resilience that you can feel through the novel, or I guess through the memoir. I haven't read that many memoirs, but I definitely feel like this one was definitely one of my favorites for this year. I guess that leads into the next memoir, which is also one of the greatest books I read last year. It may not come as a surprise to most of you, but it's I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So for those of you that don't know who Jeanette McCurdy is, she played Sam on iCarly and the spin-off series Sam and Cat with Ariana Grande. For those of you that grew up watching iCarly and kind of seeing how those kids are portrayed in that show compared to how Jeanette actually grew up, like her actual childhood, it's gonna come as a shocker, especially involving the things she went through at Nickelodeon, the things she went through at the hands of her mother. And it's really heartbreaking to hear coming from someone who is very fortunate to have a great mother in their life. Like, this is just heartbreaking. I guess some people may take it for granted, their mother's love, but for Jeanette, I guess it was like a double-bladed sword. Like, she said she felt the love of her mother, but she also grew up and realized that her mother was also abusive to her. I guess how to describe it is, even though Jeanette went through so many tough things, like, you can still hear her humor in the book. Like, it's so strange. It's like, it's so sad, but there's kind of like this dry, sarcastic humor in the book that made it not so dark and heavy. I guess in the way she wrote it is what made this book so great. She doesn't just discuss all the hard things she went through, but just like, I guess just like Viola Davis, there's a lot of resilience there and hopefulness and I guess strength in getting through all the things that she had to go through as a child and even as an adult. There's a lot of trigger warnings. Oh, I didn't even mention that in Finding Me, but with these memoirs, guys, highly recommend you look up the trigger warnings. There are quite a lot of them. I know for Viola Davis's memoir, there was domestic violence, child abuse, poverty. I think there's also alcoholism and drug use in there. Also some sexual assault. So just be aware of that. And then for Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, there's trigger warnings for eating disorders, depression, alcoholism I know was also in there. But I may be missing a few, so make sure you just look those up before you get into it and make sure it's something that you can safely read. Oh, okay, getting on to a lighter note. I put two of these on here because I couldn't decide. I mean, it's my video. Technically, I guess this would be like 11. Hey, I'm just gonna talk about them together because they're by the same author. So Shadows of Self, the second book in the Mistborn Era 2 series by Brandon Sanderson, and Words of Radiance, the second book in the Stormlight Archive series, also by Brandon Sanderson. So these two, I couldn't really decide which one I wanted to put in my top books of the year. It's really no surprise. I mean, I think you can kind of see them here. I love the Mistborn series. Mistborn book 1 was what got me back into reading in 2019. It's what basically brought all of this on. So of course I continued on with Era 2, and I didn't like the first book, but the second book, Shadows of Self, oh my gosh, that one was a great one. I can't really describe Mistborn Era 2 without spoiling anything. Okay, so Mistborn is one of the series in the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. It's like a connected world, and in this world, people gain, I guess, abilities, magical abilities by ingesting metals. So not really like eating metal, like bits of metal in a fluid. Okay, anyway, so the second era follows what hundreds of years after the first era. It's kind of like a Western, a little bit, like a crime Western novel following these two men, Wax and Wayne. Wax is a lawman and Wayne is his partner, and they both have these abilities that they use to help, I guess, solve their crimes and catch the bad guys, basically. It's a lot more lighthearted than the first era Mistborn. So if you've read the first era and you're thinking of getting into the second one, it is a very different tone, very different characters. But if you didn't like the first book and it almost, or is making you not want to continue with the rest of it, I highly recommend that you continue anyway. It gets a lot better in the second and third books. So the second one is still my favorite, but I still highly recommend the series. Now for Words of Radiance, it was so tough trying to decide which one I liked better, The Way of Kings, the first book, or Words of Radiance, the second one. So the Stormlight Archive basically follows three main characters, I guess, in this separate world, a separate world in the Cosmere universe. So it follows, I guess I'll discuss what The Way of Kings is about so there's no spoilers. So the Storm Knight archive basically follows 4 very different characters. One is a surgeon who turned into a slave for I guess a king, who turned into a slave in the king's army. The second character is an assassin who is forced to kill and is very, I guess, troubled by the things that he, for some reason, has to do. The third character is a young woman who has a lot of secrets and mysteries and lies in her story. And the last character is an older lord who used to be a very prominent warrior, very prominent soldier general in his army, and is now his past in violence has changed who he is. So I guess following this 4 people who live on this country called Roshar, where war is about to break out between them and another species living on this planet. And apparently one of them will destroy the world and another one of them may redeem it. I love Brandon Sanderson's works. I mean, you saw that book. It is a brick, but I pretty much enjoy every single one of them. Brandon Sanderson's world building, his magic systems, his way of writing, his characters, like, it just works for me. I like fantasy novels that get to the point. I'm all about great characters, but if great characters come at the expense of a boring plot, it's not for me. So I feel like Brandon Sanderson really balances this all out well with the way he writes. It really brings his plot, his characters, and his world building and magic system all together full circle. I feel like it's a great starting point for fantasy. I think Brandon Sanderson's writing is very accessible. So if you're thinking of getting into high epic fantasy, I think his works are a great place to start. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. So yes, The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this book is about a teenage Latin American teenager living in, I think she's in New York. I'm not a fan of poetry. Like, I really am not, but the fact that I like this book really speaks to how great it is, because it isn't even my type, my style. I really love the discussions that Elizabeth Acevedo brought up in here. It talks about the struggles that this young girl faces as a Hispanic young woman living with her mother, and the expectations that her mother has for her, and what an ideal young woman should be, and how that doesn't fit who she is. It also talks about how her body is so objectified as a young woman, and that's not what she wants. Like, she feels like she's being blamed for maturing, for having the body type that she does, that she's objectified, she is sexualized by men on the street. Her mom like blames her for being like promiscuous young woman, when that's not at all how it is. I mean, her body is the way it is, and like her reactions from men, and how she's had to build up this front, like put a shield up, put a hard shell up to protect herself from other people, from not just men, but also from her own mother, and how people perceive her a certain way based on how she looks. It also talks about her relationship with her twin brother and the hardships she feels is having to try and protect him because of everything that he's going through, and that strong desire, or that strong, it's not maternal instinct, she has that strong like bond with her siblings, so she feels like she has to protect him from all the people who may want to hurt him based on how he is as a person. So he's the more like sensitive pacifist type, where he doesn't believe in violence, and she feels like she has to learn how to fight, how to protect herself and her brother too. It also talks about how what she enjoys and what she finds herself passionate about isn't being supported by her parents, and that's another thing that she struggles with, is being able to pursue what she wants at the expense of her family, if she has to do without their support. And another thing, and it even touches on religion, like how she feels like her relationship with God and her, like, I really felt for that. It's when you're Catholic, it's like you have to do certain things. And she wants to know why she has to do these things, and she wants to know why the Bible says these things and why her church is teaching these things. And she, I guess, struggles with her faith. That's another thing that's discussed in this book. So I feel like even though this comes from the perspective of a teenage girl, I feel like any age, any gender can get something from this. Beautiful writing, the lessons in it are great. So the next book I'm going to talk about, I won't talk too long because I talked about it in the previous video, is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. So for this book, oh man, I love fantasy. I think I've mentioned that earlier, but this is a cozy fantasy that's really just kind of like slice of life. Like, there is no crazy plot, no epic storyline, epic world. It's really just about this magical creature, woman, who wants to give up her past of violence and war to open up a coffee shop in this magical setting. And it really is just a slice of life, like her working towards finding a location, renovating her space, finding people who would be interested in working with her, you know, making coffee, baking pastries, and figuring out how to get her business off the ground and flourishing. And I really loved it. Like, it gave me like a nice warm feeling on the inside, and I didn't find it boring at all. Like, I actually was really rooting for our main character and her group of friends to succeed. And even when the plot did kind of get a little involved towards the end, I still enjoyed it because I love the characters and I loved everything that it talked about. The next best book that I read last year was Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. So in previous years, I read And Then There Are None by Agatha Christie and Murder on the Orient Express. So this is the third book written by her that I've read. I also watched the movie right after, and I really felt like that helped, like, in me loving this story. A group of people are on this ship cruising the Nile when one of the passengers is discovered dead. So that's basically what it is. Hercule Poirot, the investigator from this series of books, is trying to solve the murder. And I just love the way Agatha Christie tells a mystery. Like, I'm with this detective trying to figure out like all the different ways that this person could have been killed. Like, what happened? Like, if you're a fan of A Murder on the Orient Express, you're definitely gonna love this one because it has that very similar vibe, but a whole new set of characters, a whole new plot. Basically, like, I feel like if you love playing Clue, the board game, and you still have fun every time you reset the board and have to rediscover every time, then you'll like this, because I guess the tone, the spirit of her stories remains the same, but the formula changes up a bit every time. So I definitely highly recommend this one. So the next book that I'm going to be talking about, I'm talking about them together because they're written by the same author again, and they are Saving Noah and The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry. So as you can see, like, most of the books that I really love, I end up buying physically if I don't already own it. So I think I talked about these two in my last video as well, so I won't get too into it. But Lucinda Berry is actually I think she's like a psychologist. She's a trauma psychologist and leading researcher in childhood trauma. So she uses her experience as a psychologist to write books with good mental health representation. So The Saving Noah is about a teenage pedophile and how his crimes affect his family and affect his life. And it gives a really good look into how pedophilia is a disease, not just a crime, it's a disease, and how it ruins everybody's lives around them, and how this horrible crime that most people feel a certain way about isn't just in black and white. Like, this really talks about the gray parts of it, like what to do if this person isn't that disgusting old man behind a TV screen selling child porn. You know, it's a lot more nuanced than that, this disease. And it talks about this teenage boy who seems like the perfect child until he commits a crime, how his mother feels. Like, I felt like that's another great choice that Lucinda Berry took, is also telling the story from the point of view of his mother, a woman who's meant to love him no matter what, even if he's done one of the most heinous crimes out there. So I felt like, of course, lots of trigger warnings in here. Please look them up before you decide to get into this. But if you want a very difficult read, a very controversial read, then I definitely recommend Saving Noah. The second book by Agatha Christie that I really enjoyed was The Perfect Child. So this story is about an older couple who have trouble conceiving a child and end up adopting a child that was found in the parking lot of a hospital. So this child was found like abused, malnourished, like underdeveloped, and all the struggles they face after they adopt her, and how her past definitely the things that she's gone through have definitely affect her development and affect how she acts towards them and other people. This book was actually really creepy. Saving Noah, not so much. It was just unsettling, like disturbing. The Perfect Child was not just disturbing. I also found it pretty scary. Like if you're a fan of creepy children horror or creepy children thrillers, you should definitely read this one. The last book I'm going to be talking about is Witchy by Ariel Slamet Reese. So this is not... it isn't a novel, it's a graphic novel. This is a graphic novel in a magical world where the extent of your abilities is represented in the length of your hair. So if your hair is too short, you're considered weak, but if your hair is too long, you may be considered a threat to the kingdom. So our main character presents herself, uses a magical solution to hide the length of her hair when it's actually really long. And when that is discovered, she has to go on the run for her life. So I felt like, I mean, the drawings aren't like the greatest. They're pretty good, but what I really enjoyed this book for was the story. Like I really enjoyed our main character, and even the side characters in here are really great. The emotion of the characters in the story are really drawn well. Like you can really see the emotions playing out on their faces, and the plot is really well written out. Like the action scenes in here are really great, and yeah, I thought it was a very enjoyable fantasy novel, and I definitely recommend this one. And with that said, guys, that is all of the best books that I read in 2022. I hope you guys got some good recommendations from this video, and I hope you find your next great read. And with that said, thank you all for watching today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.